Picture this. You're a 12-year-old boy living in a quiet, Bulgarian village in the year 1550. The morning mist clings to the hills like a ghostly veil as you help your father tend the sheep. The soft clinking of the bells around their necks forms a familiar melody, the backdrop to your entire childhood. Your mother is inside preparing breakfast. Warm bread and goat's milk that tastes like home, like comfort, like everything you've ever known. Then, suddenly, you hear it, the thunder of hooves on cobblestone. Your father's face drains of colour, turning as pale as parchment. Your mother drops the clay jug in her hands, it shatters on the floor. And with it, your whole world is about to break apart. Because everyone in your village knows what that sound means. The Sultan's collectors have arrived. You crouch behind a wooden cart, heart pounding as Ottoman officials dismount their horses. Their silk garments remain spotless despite the long journey. They carry scrolls and lists, and their eyes sweep over the villagers like merchants assessing livestock. One of them points straight at you. Your mother drops to her knees, pleading in a language they do not understand and do not care to. Your father stands frozen, knowing that any resistance could mean death for everyone. You are torn from your family with promises that you will serve the Sultan, that greatness awaits you, that this is an honor. But as the cart wheels you away from everything familiar, the only thing you can hear are your mother's sobs, growing fainter with each passing moment. You will never see her again. This is the beginning of your new life, as a palace servant, a ghulam, in one of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen. And the horrors awaiting you behind those palace walls would soon make you yearn for the peaceful days of watching sheep in the misty hills of your homeland. Before we uncover these buried stories of torment and endurance, if you're fascinated by the hidden truths of history, hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It amazes me that we can explore these ancient tales together, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity. The journey to Istanbul marked your first experience with the organized cruelty that would now define your life. You and dozens of other boys were marched for weeks over harsh terrain. You were poorly fed, left to sleep under open skies or in crude shelters that barely shielded you from wind and rain. The weak, those who stumbled, fell sick, or lost the will to go on, were simply left behind. You quickly absorbed your first lesson in palace life, long before you ever saw the capital. Weakness meant death, and only those who were strong, smart, or adaptable would make it through what lay ahead. The boy walking next to you, maybe 14, had come from a Greek fishing village. His name was Nikos. He whispered that soon, even that name would be forbidden. He tried to escape on the third night. The guards caught him less than a mile out and dragged him back to camp. There, in front of everyone, they beat him as a warning. His screams echoed through the hills. You shut your eyes tightly, but it did no good. The message was clear: escape was impossible. Resistance, fatal. By the time you reached the outskirts of Istanbul, you'd already become a shadow of your former self. You learned to stay silent unless spoken to move like a ghost. You stayed invisible whenever the guards' gazes turned threatening. You'd seen boys vanish overnight, some who tried to flee, others who simply gave up. The empty spots they left behind haunted the line, grim reminders of your own fragility. When Istanbul's majestic skyline finally appeared, it should have taken your breath away. The minaret slicing the sky, the immense dome of Hagia Sophia, and the massive palace that would now be your prison. But all you felt was a heavy dread settling deep in your gut. This city, this empire, it stood for everything you'd lost and everything you feared you were becoming. Upon arrival, you faced your first selection. Ottoman officials split the surviving boys into groups based on perceived potential. The process was invasive and humiliating. They inspected your teeth like livestock, tested your reflexes, asked you to recite what little you knew of numbers and letters, measured your height, examined your skin, and studied your face as if assessing a painting's worth. The most handsome, intelligent boys were marked for palace education, the Enderan. Others were destined to become janissaries, elite soldiers of the empire, but those chosen for palace service, they faced a different kind of suffering, one that wouldn't just challenge the body, but attempt to erase the soul. You were one of the fortunate few selected for the Enderan school, located deep within the Topkapi Palace. The officials who chose you noted your clear skin, your bright eyes, your intelligence, and they smiled. But you didn't yet understand, those smiles weren't kind. They were the smiles of predators who had found promising prey. The Enderan school is often hailed as the world's first formal education system for gifted boys. And while that may be technically accurate, it hides the darker truth. You'd study Arabic, Persian, Turkish. You'd learn mathematics, astronomy, literature, law. You'd be trained in music, calligraphy, and skilled trades. But this education came at a price far greater than academic discipline. The palace, now your home, was a labyrinth of marble halls, gilded rooms, and secret corridors, a place where danger hid behind opulence. You were assigned to a dormitory within the palace grounds. Beyond those walls, layers of guards, rules, and rituals made escape not just unlikely, but unthinkable. Your dormitory stretched before you like a marble tomb. Narrow beds lined the space, draped in silk that felt less like comfort and more like a trap. Your first night in that dormitory, you lie awake, listening to the sounds that would become the background noise of your captivity, the quiet sobbing of homesick boys trying to stifle their tears in their pillows, murmured conversations in languages you couldn't yet understand, and the soft footsteps of older students and supervisors pacing the halls after curfew. You gripped the tiny wooden cross your mother had slipped into your palm as you were taken away. But by sunrise, even that final link to your past would be uncovered and taken from you. You were given a new identity, Mesmet, and ordered to erase all memory of your Christian roots. Conversion to the empire's state religion wasn't a suggestion, it was a requirement, a key step in turning you from a captured outsider into a servant of the Ottoman court. The ceremony was carried out with grand fanfare, as though you had freely chosen this new path. But you knew, and so did everyone else, that choice had never been part of the equation. You echoed the words they demanded, but in your heart you clung to your mother's songs and your father's stories. Yet the most disturbing part of your schooling was the deliberate erosion of your personal will, the methodical re-engineering of your identity into a tool for imperial use, one that served both power and pleasure. The palace ran on a strict multi-layered hierarchy where advancement relied not only on academic performance, but also on your ability to satisfy those above you. And satisfying could mean things no child should ever be forced to understand. Your first true initiation into these silent rules came from Amit, an older student who'd been part of the system for 3 years. One night, he sat beside you in the dormitory, uninvited, his voice calm but laced with authority. You don't know how this place works yet, but I do. I can protect you, guide you, help you move forward. The teachers listen to me. I recommend which boys to favor. He placed his hand on your shoulder. You froze. At 12, you had never been touched by a stranger like this, but something about his posture made your skin crawl. In return, he whispered, voice dropping low, you need to show appreciation. There are ways boys like you can repay older students, ways that stay private, just between us. Jew, you faced a decision that countless others had been forced to confront before you. Refuse and face violence, isolation, and the death of any hope for advancement. Accept and give up the last remnants of your childhood innocence to a system that viewed your body as something to be used in exchange for protection. There were no good options, only survival. The palace's sexual system was predatory and deeply entrenched, its rules shaped by generations of exploitation. Eunuchs, many of whom had been castrated as boys and carried invisible wounds, held significant authority. They knew every detail of the system because they had once been victims of it. But rather than shield the newcomers, many of them became its most active enforcers. Older students preyed on younger ones, continuing cycles of abuse that had existed long before you arrived. It was a twisted rite of passage. Those who had been exploited climbed the ranks by doing the same to those below them. Palace officials also took advantage of their positions to gain access to the most attractive boys, knowing full well that their victims had nowhere to turn and no one who would protect them. What made the whole structure especially cruel was that it wasn't hidden. These relationships were part of the palace's internal order. They were accepted, normalized, and so deeply ingrained in daily life that they felt inevitable. A boy who caught the attention of someone influential could suddenly find doors opening, his studies became easier, his status rose, his life became more bearable. But those who resisted or failed to satisfy expectations were pushed aside into lesser roles, punished more harshly, or simply erased from the palace registers as if they had never existed. The psychological toll this took on boys like you was both immense and intentional. Cut off from your family, stripped of your name and beliefs, thrown into a world where your body was currency. What we now call complex trauma began to show. Some boys adapted by becoming sly and manipulative, learning to leverage their appearance and behavior to gain advantage. Others withdrew completely, going through the motions while their inner selves slowly disintegrated. You witnessed both transformations. Dmitri, another boy from your homeland, figured out quickly how the game worked. He laughed with the older students, flirted with teachers. Within 6 months, he wore better clothes, ate finer meals, and had a personal tutor for languages. But his eyes were blank. He stopped speaking of his parents, his village, anything beyond the palace. When new boys arrived, he looked at them with the same detached, assessing stare that the officials had once used on him. Stephanos, the son of a Greek fisherman, took the opposite route. He refused every advance, suffered beatings and isolation, and slowly faded into a ghost. He fulfilled his duties, studied enough to pass, but you could see him unraveling bit by bit. Then, one morning, his bed was empty. No one asked what happened. No one mentioned his name again. You tried to walk a line between the two, accepting some things to stay alive, but clinging to a tiny shard of self that still belonged to you. But the palace wasn't made for that kind of balance. Each day brought fresh choices, new forms of humiliation or pain, new ways the system tried to remake you in its image. Occasionally, foreign diplomats visiting the Ottoman court caught brief glimpses of this hidden reality, though what they saw was limited and filtered through their own cultural lenses. One Venetian ambassador in the 16th century wrote about the unusually affectionate behavior that palace officials displayed toward their young male attendants. He described scenes that disturbed him, though even his words only scratched the surface of what really went on behind closed doors. In extreme cases, accounts spoke of boys as young as 10 or 11, draped in silk and glittering jewels, attending to older men in ways that suggested far more than a servant's duties. A 17th century French diplomat recounted what he observed at a palace reception. The boys, he wrote, moved like exquisite birds trapped in golden cages, their eyes lowered, their bodies groomed for display. What struck him most was how some officials watched them with a sense of possession and the flicker of fear in the boys' eyes whenever one of those men drew near. The physical environment of palace life only amplified the psychological torment. Everything was designed to crush resistance and cultivate dependence. You lived in cramped dormitories with almost no privacy, under constant watch. Before sunrise, you were roused for prayers you had been forced to memorize. Meals were strict and sparse, never indulgent, always regulated. Punishments were routine and carefully designed to humiliate and break spirits. Speaking your native tongue, practicing old customs, or even failing to appear enthusiastic about your new life could result in beatings, public shaming, or solitary confinement in cells barely big enough to stretch your legs. You remember Milos, the boy caught praying in the style of his former faith. They made him stand naked in the courtyard from dawn till dusk, as others were ordered to mock him. The message was brutal and unmistakable. Your past wasn't just forbidden, it was something to be ashamed of. The palace's internal reward system added new layers of manipulation. Good behavior, academic excellence, or pleasing your superiors could earn you minor luxuries. In such a confined world, these comforts became everything. This structure bred dependency, loyalty, and a willingness to comply that made true resistance nearly impossible. You adapted quickly. You learned to survive with the cunning of someone far beyond your age. Helping older students with their lessons sometimes earned you their protection from both their cruelty and their advances. Excelling in particular subjects got you noticed by teachers who could shield you from abuse. Perfect obedience and visible enthusiasm became your tools. In exchange, you earned slivers of freedom that, in your shrinking world, felt monumental. Some boys tried to escape, but with the palace isolated on a peninsula and surrounded by water, running was nearly futile. The few who dared often paid dearly. You remember the boy who tried swimming across the Golden Horn. They dragged him back half dead. His punishment, a savage public beating, left him crippled for life. He remained among you as a living warning, broken, silent, ruined. Even those who got away faced a crueler truth. They no longer belonged anywhere. Their original identities were stripped away. Families couldn't recognize them. Villages saw them as traitors or infidels. And without any worldly skills, they were adrift, forgotten boys in a world they no longer fit. As you aged inside the palace, surviving on cleverness and submission, new horrors emerged. Some of your peers began to rise, promoted into government roles, symbols of success. But you saw what that success truly cost. Many of those now in power had once stood beside you in the dormitories. They too had been broken and rebuilt. Now they were the ones shaping and scarring the next generation. That realization left you with a cruel choice: resist the system and be crushed by it, or become one of its architects. Many chose the latter. It was easier to become a predator than to remain prey forever. The final rite of passage, the Sikmar, marked the end of your palace education and your formal entry into Imperial service. After years of systemic abuse dressed up as elite training, you emerged outwardly accomplished, fluent in several languages, educated in politics, arts, and science. But inside, you were altered. Your understanding of power had fused with exploitation. Your ability to love, to trust, warped beyond recognition. For many, graduation was just a transfer from one realm of control to another. Those placed in bureaucratic posts found that political advancement still relied on unspoken transactions. The toxic lessons of the palace followed them into adulthood. Those sent into the military often became either savage instruments of imperial force or broken men unable to find purpose. The Ottoman elite held a complex attitude toward these practices, one that helped preserve the very system they claimed to civilize. On paper, many forms of abuse were banned. In reality, anything that served the empire's goals was quietly tolerated. What mattered wasn't the boys, it was the results: loyal, efficient, well-trained servants of the state. Criticism of the system was often brushed off as a misunderstanding of the empire's refined methods. Occasionally, even Ottoman writers admitted the system's darker side. One 16th century court historian put it bluntly: yes, the palace school requires great sacrifices. Not all who enter come out the same. But from this crucible emerge the finest instruments of the empire, men whose loyalty is unshakable and whose abilities are unmatched. This language of improvement and transformation concealed a darker reality. One you lived every day. What they called training was, in truth, systematic sexual abuse. What they praised as discipline was the slow, deliberate erasure of your former self and the rebuilding of a new identity, crafted not for your benefit, but to serve the desires of the empire. Your education came at the cost of your childhood, your innocence, and your ability to form real human bonds. What made the Ottoman palace system so disturbing wasn't just the cruelty, it was how seamlessly abuse was fused with opportunity. Yes, you were taught to read and write in languages that connected empires. You were introduced to the sciences, mathematics, administration, and the art of war, a curriculum more advanced than most of the world at that time. But none of it could be separated from your exploitation. The same men who taught you strategy also violated your trust and your body. The same palace that gave you skills also shattered your sense of self. The advancement they promised came wrapped in scars, permanent, silent, hidden. This system exposed a deep and tangled link between power, sexuality, and violence in pre-modern societies. The Ottomans weren't alone in exploiting children. Such practices echoed through ancient Rome, China, Persia, and across medieval Europe. But the Ottoman structure stood out for its scale, precision, and unapologetic integration into the state's machinery. This wasn't a secret perversion, it was an official institution, celebrated and defended by those it benefited. By the 1600s and 1700s, the system began to fade. New forms of warfare made the janissaries less crucial. Bureaucracies evolved. Western influence brought social and political change. But for the thousands of boys who passed through the gates at the height of the system, these changes came far too late. You were one of them, a child taken, reshaped, scarred. Some, like you, rose to high office. Viziers, generals, governors, who moulded the empire's future. But even those men carried the weight of their trauma, many continuing the same abuse that had shaped them. Others vanished into history, their lives reduced to records, entries listing when they arrived, where they served, when they died. The palace still stands, its marble floors gleam beneath tourist feet. Visitors gaze in awe at its domes, its ornate chambers, the relics of royal grandeur. But they don't see what you saw. They don't hear the silence in the rooms where your body and mind were broken. They don't feel the cold air that once trembled with your fear, your silence, your loss. Guides talk of innovation, how the palace trained the elite of a mighty empire. They rarely mention the boys who resisted, broke, or disappeared, or the men forever haunted by what was done to them in those halls. The marble corridors hide the truth well. Now, as I finish telling your imagined story, which stands for thousands more like it, I'm reminded this is not some curious footnote of history. This is the real cost of empire. Children torn from their homes, stripped of identity, moulded into tools. You, the boy I picture, standing alone in the dim hallway, fear caught in your throat, represent all the children whose names we never learned. The ones history forgot, even as the empire celebrated the system that consumed them. Your ghost, and the ghosts of boys like you, still walk those silent halls. They remind us that behind every golden empire lies a foundation built not of marble, but of human suffering. The horror was not just the violence, but how completely it was normalized, how efficiently it was hidden, how easily it was forgotten. You lived and died as a beautiful object, not a human being. Your story deserves to be remembered, not as an exotic tale of a forgotten empire, but as evidence of resilience in the face of cruelty. The dawn that once lit your fearful steps has long since faded. But your story echoes on, a warning, a memory, a cry for truth. Because in remembering you, we remember every child used and discarded by the grinding gears of power. Every child forced to serve conquest over compassion, empire over innocence.